Next thing, we're going to look into our action that's part of Vuex, and we're going to use some actions and the dispatch to set the user we're logged in with. So right now, once we're logged in here, there's no indication of which user is logged in. So we're going to use Vuex, and we're going to use the action dispatch to grab the information about the user and then set them accordingly to whoever's user is logged in and present them on, or render them on the page, right? So if you are curious on how we can manage users, if you go to Firebase and you can just type Firebase space manage users, and you should get to this position here. So what we want to use some of these things here later on to actually grab the information about the user logged in. So we're probably just going to use the email, but if they had a name, if they added a photo, so if you log into your Firebase, and you can actually see that the information you created when we created it with the email some videos back, you can set up an image, a photo ID, photo URL, I think it's called. Actually, it's down here. So you can see photo URL. If that's set up, you can just grab the information and use the image source to actually show of user v image to actually show this image of the logged in user as well. So you know this from Facebook, right? Your profile picture and so on. So we're going to use this to start setting up the different things. So if we go back to our store.js here, the first thing we're going to do is inside the state here. So before the state ends and after the basket item, we're going to do a comma separation, and we're going to do something called currentUser. So we're going to set this to null as a start, because that's how it's being built in Firebase. So if there's no user, then set it to null. So not empty array or empty string, just set it to null. So that's the first thing we need to do. That's not too hard. So scroll down to your mutations, and let's add it after the add basket here. So mine ends just here, and I'm going to add my my mutation in here to get information about the user. I'm going to call this user status. And in this one, we're going to, just like before, we have the state, and then we have we have a payload, and the payload in this case will be our user, right? So why is this one here? Go away. And then we have our function, or our curly brackets here, and inside this we're going to basically do what they do here. So if user or else. So we can basically, let's just copy this, or we're going to write it so we don't make errors. But basically we're going to do similar things as this one over here. So let's have this so we can see. So we're going to check to see if user, do inside of the parentheses, and then that's our first statement. So if the user is true, and then we set the current user to user. So we're just storing him here so we can use him later on, or her. And then we have the else statement, of course. So if the current user doesn't exist, it's not logged in, we set it to null, right? So if there's no user logged in, then we set it to null. If there is a user, we store the information in the variable called user. That's not too hard either. The last thing we need to do is we want to set up an action to control the different things we have here. So if we have a, we want to call the action, we want to use the action to control the mutation to get the information and so on. So we're going to call this set user here. And this takes in the context. So if we go to actions here and we scroll down, actually it's here, you can see when we use using actions, instead of using the state, they use the context here. So that's not something we decide, that's something they do decide. So we pass in the argument of context, not content, and the user here to have the information about that one. Now in this one, we're going to use the context because that's what we are receiving up here. And then we're going to commit this, just like we did with our, where did it go? It's up here somewhere. No, it's in the menu. So when we commit our mutation through our click, so in our menu down here, where did it go? Here we go. So we send information to our store. We're going to use that one here as well. And the one we want to store this is user status. And, outside this. And the last one is user. So this is what we need to set up for now in our store. So we have our current user set to null as a standard. When nothing happens, if we're totally fresh to the page, it's null. And then we're going to check here in a mutation that if the user is logged in, then we're storing the user in user, and if it's not, then we're continuing setting it to null, and then we're passing it, and we're going to use our actions to actually control how the mutation works. So this is the first part of it, and the next video we're going to look at how we can use the dispatching. So the dispatch, the action, so we can actually get the information and print out the, for example, the email of the user we are going to be presenting, we're logged in as.